Keeping it real, keeping it right, the Vicki McKenna Show, the Wednesday edition. Glad you're here with us. I'm Matt Kittle, filling in. The U.S. Supreme Court recently took Joe Biden's corrupt Department of Justice to task, ruling that prosecutors' use of the obstruction of an official proceeding charge under the 2002 Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the cases of J6 defendants was an overly broad, to say the least, use of the Enron-era law. Tim Hale is among more than 300 J6 defendants improperly, unconstitutionally charged. He sat in a D.C. jail for a long time because of that fact. He joins us now on the Vicki McKenna Show. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You and I have talked in the past, obviously, over at the Federalist most recently. And, you know, within that conversation, we talked about your experiences over the last 4 years. And as I said at the outset of our conversation, you spent time in jail for something you did not do, according to the Supreme Court. Tell us about your experiences and how long, not only were you in a D.C. jail, but you were in solitary confinement for a time as well.
That's right. And it is a pleasure to be speaking with you again. What people need to realize is that many of us, after January 6th, were denied bond. So you tend to think of the right to bail, but it wasn't so clear-cut after January 6th with the federal government. And so many of us who were denied bail were kept as pretrial detainees within Washington, D.C. So this jail, the D.C. Gulag, as it's called, many of us were kept in solitary confinement for a year. And this is not the extent of it. We were actually kept, I in particular was kept in D.C. for approximately 2 years. I was incarcerated for about 3 years overall. I did about 3 years on a 4-year sentence. Now, keep in mind, the reason people were held so long, yes, it's because they were denied bail, but it's also because a lot of our trials were actually pushed off. So someone like myself, I had a lot of my sentence basically front-loaded. So they did that to a lot of people to kind of coerce them into taking plea deals. So a lot of us ended up sitting in there and rotting in jail because they wouldn't even give us a trial. So they front-loaded our sentences in many cases. All
to what is becoming increasingly clear, should become increasingly clear to Americans everywhere, despite the show trial that was put on by Democrats in the House a while back, along with some accomplices, Republicans certainly in name only, certainly conservatives in name only. But, you know, take us back to that day, because there's a different record that is coming out in what happened as opposed to the J6 committee and what the accomplice media has been telling us.
Well, most certainly. And this is one of the things I always make a point to bring attention to, as we did last time we spoke, is that this isn't a difference of opinion. There actually is video evidence that I've released just from my own phone showing that the lead up to what happened at the Capitol is very different than, say, CNN or members of Congress would even like the public to believe. People were at the Ellipse listening to a speech, and then before Trump's speech was even finished, a half hour before people like me even got to the Capitol, you had a barrier, very kind of, we'll say piecemeal perimeter that was taken apart with some interesting characters there. So thousands of people poured into an area they didn't know was restricted, quote unquote, restricted area. And so if you look at the video, most of us were chanting USA. We were singing God Bless America. And it was a very peaceful protest. And most of the violence you see that is, pushed on the same 30-second clips for the last 3 years is very isolated. Most of us didn't even know there was violence. And so when the crowd starts getting attacked by the Capitol Police, really more so the Metro PD, they just think they're being attacked for supporting President Trump. And so this creates a snowball effect. People don't realize that there are agitators in the crowd who are trying to hype things up. there were definitely assets in the crowd that were trying to entrap people. And I think ultimately, if you look at everything holistically, you will see that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. It was not an insurrection, but I guess you could also say it also was not just Trump supporters who were there. There was a lot going on, a lot.
Tim Hale, among more than 300 J6 defendants improperly charged under what is known as the 2002 Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You have to read the Supreme Court ruling. It really does lay everything out why that charge was so unconstitutional and such a stretch. I mean, it really reminds you of what happened in a Manhattan courtroom several weeks ago now when the former president of the United States was convicted on all 34 felony counts against him in a manipulated charge. That's exactly what DOJ prosecutors did to you folks, the 300 charged with this obstruction of official proceedings charge. But you've already paid for that on the front end. There are still people paying for that. The question I think our listeners would have is, so what happens now? Where do you go to get that time back?
Well, you can't get it back. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people would like to say, well, you should sue the government. In many cases, it actually is very difficult to do that. In some cases, depending on how the immunity exists, the government would have to consent to being sued in some instances. It's very complicated. Yep. I think we're going to have to wait for a change in administration for any sort of recompense, so to speak. But, yeah, you're absolutely right. People are still suffering for this, even though I think largely they've stopped charging people with 1512. You are seeing prosecutors sort of hinting that they're going to, well, not even hinting. Some of them actually are actively saying that they're going to try to reformulate their theory of the 1512. So 3 years later, now suddenly they're going to have to come up with a different explanation for why 1512 is legitimate to conform to what the Supreme Court justices have said. So now they're going to make the argument that it was about tampering with documents, even though that never was their argument. So for those that don't know, if you don't mind me explaining, you mentioned the Sarbanes-Oxley. For those that don't know, after the Enron scandal, this substatute was added to 1512. 1512 was originally about tampering with witnesses. So the substatute after Enron was about tampering with documents. So it's not hard to see how there could be a leap between those two. You're interfering with the power of inquiry, let's say. But that's really not what January 6th was about. That's not why anybody was really there. Nobody was really there to tamper with documents or even the electoral certificates. And the government never alleged that. Now they're starting to hint that maybe they'll try that. But we'll see what the lower courts say. We'll see if they go along with that. A lot of them have egg on their face, so we'll see if they're willing to keep dragging this out. Hopefully not.
Well, good Lord, you take a look at this administration and it's thumbing its nose at Supreme Court decisions already. I mean, I think maybe the clearest example that every ordinary American, every average American knows about, and that's the student loan bailout. We have a Supreme Court ruling saying you can't do that. Joe Biden says, not only going to do that, we're going to double down on it. We're going to do it even more, all for political purposes. And Tim, that's the bottom line here as we close out our conversation today. All of this is being done. I think it should be clear and much clearer now to Americans who have opened up their minds to take a closer look at what actually happened on January 6, 2021. This is all being done for political purposes. It's all being done to re-elect Joe Biden and keep Democrats in power. Agree? Disagree?
Well, absolutely. It's an important observation. It might seem self-evident, but it really needs to be acknowledged. We really all need to start thinking about this as citizens, that the justice system was made separate from the legislative and executive for a reason. It was never meant to co-sign on legislative or executive tyranny. The judicial system exists as a check on the other two powers, but it also exists for the benefit of the citizens. when you look at the rights that they've been denying us, everything from the Bill of Rights, that was real. The majority of the Bill of Rights is about protecting citizens from an out-of-control prosecution. And so we're now seeing the exact opposite. We're seeing an incredible inversion of the things that made America a free nation. So they're weaponizing the legal system. That's no small feat. It is actually the most dangerous thing we could see in our lifetimes, I think. So it is about reelecting a corrupt regime, and it is about targeting President Trump. But there's going to be long-term ramifications if we don't rein this in now. I think that's what SCOTUS was trying to do, because I think even they saw, the forest for the trees there. But it's not going to stop with 1512. They're going to keep doing this. Even if you just look at where the 1512 came from, it was even then it was first upheld in federal court for federal informants, 3 co-defendants who admitted in the D.C. jail they went to the Capitol to get out of trouble for drug conspiracies. This is something Americans really need to pay attention to, because it's not going to stop unless we say something about it.
You are absolutely right. And there's no doubt there was definitely rioting going on at the Capitol on that day. That is clear. That happened. But I think you are talking on a radio station in southeast Wisconsin. Milwaukee, we're just up the road from Kenosha. We know what happened on those 4 days in late August of 2020. And we had Marxists burning that city, or attempting to burn portions of that city to the ground. And that was billed as mostly peaceful by the usual useful idiots on the left and the accomplice media. It's hard to take a look at what happened on January 6th and see what happened in Kenosha in 2020 and say, wait a minute here, hold the phone. I appreciate your time. Good luck to you moving forward. I know more than ever you folks are going to need it.
God bless you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
God bless you, and take care. Tim Hale, one of the 300 plus J6 defendants wrongly, unconstitutionally charged for obstruction of official proceedings, the charge tied into an Enron-era law that the Supreme Court of the United States said absolutely that is an overreach of Joe Biden's Department of Justice. Coming up straight ahead, NATO, Ukraine, and what's next? It's the Vicki McKenna Show with Matt Kittle. Hang on.